Shalom, welcome to the Jewish Task Force, J.T.F. My name is Chaim Ben Pesach. We have another program here with the great David Ben Moshe. Oh, this program is going to be a doozy. Here we're going to ask the question, was George Soros really a monster? And of course he was. And we're going to expose him in a way that you've never heard of before. You've never heard some of these things about George Soros, that the self-hating Jewish billionaire. It's going to be a lot of shocking material here. This is going to be a very important program. But before we get to that, this program is dedicated to a refuah shlema, complete recovery for Ashadina Bat Violet, Shlomo Ben Sarah, Ruth Bat Sarah, Dorit Bat Sarah, and Ruven Ben Shoshana, and to Ilui Neshamot, elevating of the souls for Sharon Mitman, Malka Bat Meir, Allegra Bat Shlomo, Daniel Nankin, Victor Chazdai, Pesach Seh Ben Dov, Lunita Adler, Shifra Hoffman, Ruven Hoffman, Barry Hoffman, Harab Mir Kahana, Harab Benjamin Kahana, Tzipora Fegi Bat Liba, Yosef Ben Meir, Robert Mitman, Dennis Shore, Helen Friedman, Charles Zolat, and Yair Levine. George Soros, the self-hating Jew, whenever anybody criticizes him, right away, people scream, anti-Semitism. When people attempt to destroy Israel in the news media, propagandize day and night to undermine Israel's struggle to survive, which would lead to a Holocaust. If Israel didn't survive, there'd be another Holocaust. And when people work in the news media to destroy Israel, to undermine Israel, do everything they can to smear Israel, that's not anti-Semitism. When they justify the Arab Muslim Nazi campaign to commit genocide against the Jews, Arab Muslim Nazis openly saying in their media every day that they plan to commit genocide, that they plan to push the Jews into the sea and finish Hitler's job. When people in the news media justify this campaign of genocide, that's not anti-Semitism. No, that you can't say anti-Semitism. That's legitimate criticism of Israel. No, there is no legitimate criticism when you're talking about Israel's survival. No legitimate criticism, because if you work to undermine Israel's survival and Israel's struggle to survive, that means you're working for the next Holocaust. You're a protagonist for the new Holocaust and the new genocide and the new Nazism. And the Muslim Nazis are Nazis. They openly praise Hitler and openly promise to commit a Holocaust. But when George Soros is criticized, all of a sudden, that is anti-Semitism. That you're not allowed to criticize George Soros. You're not allowed to do that. Glenn Beck, who is a genuine supporter of Israel, who really supports Israel, he had a program on Fox News. I don't know if, David, if you remember this.
Sure, that was quite a few years ago.
Yeah, he had a program on Fox News every day at 5 p.m., all weekdays, Monday through Friday, at 5 p.m. on Fox News for a whole hour. So it's a primetime program. And he did all types of exposés, and his program had very high ratings. He was really successful. He was really successful because he does a very good program. One day he decided to expose George Soros. And when he tried to expose George Soros, that was the end of him. That was the end of his career. Fox News fired him because of his criticizing George Soros, because the Soros propaganda machine immediately went into action saying this is anti-Semitism, the Anti-Defamation League, and AIPAC, and all these other groups. Whenever you criticize George Soros, that's anti-Semitism. And so Glenn Beck, who supports Israel and supports the Jewish people, was fired for criticizing someone, George Soros, who is harming Israel and endangering Israel in the worst way possible. That's how bad it is. You say anything bad about George Soros, you're an anti-Semite, and you can get fired. If you're in the media, you'll get fired. If you bash Israel day and night, that's okay, that's fine. In fact, you'll get a promotion. But if you dare to say anything bad about George Soros, the anti-Semite, they'll accuse you of being an anti-Semite. Now, who is George Soros, the multi-billionaire, worth tens of billions of dollars? Here's what George Soros has done with his money. First of all, let's understand his background. He himself said in an interview that he came from a, quote, Jewish anti-Semitic home in Hungary. He said that he himself said that he and his family were Jewish anti-Semites, that he came from a Jewish anti-Semitic home. That's George Soros himself speaking in an interview that he did. George Soros funds the BDS movement, the boycott, divestment movement against Israel, where they're openly working to destroy Israel. They're saying you shouldn't buy anything or have any dealings with Israel, only with Israel. 57 Muslim dictatorships that slaughter their own people, that cut the clitorises off of their women, because that's Muslim tradition. They cut the clitoris off of their women when they're only 6 years old. Who countries like Pakistan and Saudi Arabia, where if a woman is raped, the rape victim is put on trial. The rapist, nothing happens to him. He didn't do anything wrong, the rapist. He has a right to rape. It's the woman who was raped. She's put on trial. What did you do to provoke it? They put her on trial. That's Saudi Arabia. That's Pakistan. Okay, and other Muslim countries. Against them, no, nothing. By the way, they have slaughtered millions of their own people. They've slaughtered millions of their own people in Holocausts. In the Iran-Iraq War, 2 million Muslims were slaughtered by their fellow Muslims. In Syria, 1 million Arabs were slaughtered by their fellow Arabs. In Lebanon, 500,000 Arabs were slaughtered by their fellow Arabs. In Algeria, 250,000 Arabs were slaughtered by their fellow Arabs. Nobody says anything about that. That's fine. That's perfectly but there's no boycott movement against them. But
Don't
Israel,
forget the millions killed by East Pakistan, West Pakistan war.
Right. In
Bangladesh.
Pakistan, the Pakistani army slaughtered 3 million Bengali Muslims in the 1971 war. 3 million were slaughtered. I mean, that you can't get a worse Holocaust than that. And that there's no boycott against Pakistan. There's no boycott against any of these Nazi countries who do. And if this is what they do to their own people, if this is what they do to their fellow Muslims, what do you think they would do to the hated infidels? They're not boycotted. Who's boycotted? Israel is boycotted. Israel fighting to survive against all odds, against these monsters that surround Israel, that are trying to perpetrate another Holocaust. Heroic little Israel is boycotted, and they want to wipe Israel out. That's the boycott movement, funded by George Soros and other Jewish billionaires, other self-hating Jewish billionaires. Why would these self-hating Jewish billionaires do this? Because they're ashamed to be Jewish, and because they know that there's a lot of anti-Semitism in the world. They know that a lot of people hate Jews, so they don't want to be part of that. They want to show, you see, oh, don't blame me. I'm on your side. I agree with you. I'm also against Israel. I'm also working against my own people. That is the mentality of George Soros and of these other cowardly, low-life, slimy Jewish billionaires. Not every last Jewish billionaire is like that, but most of them are. Most of the Jewish billionaires behave like this, are self-hating. And George Soros is the most extreme example you can get. Well, Zuckerberg from Facebook is also, very, very much against their own people. The worst enemies of Israel. If they disappeared tomorrow, if those billionaires suddenly turned into dust and disappeared tomorrow like magic, suddenly turned into dust, Israel would be much safer and the Jewish people would be so much better off, because they're traitors and they work to undermine their own people. They are more dangerous to Israel than all of Israel's external enemies. Now, Soros funds also all of these, you see all of these anti-Semitic protests on college campuses, where they scream death to the Jews, where they show pictures of the Hamas terrorists and wave Hamas flags and burn Israeli flags and burn American flags. George Soros is funding this. He funds those demonstrations. He also funded Black Lives Matter, an organization which not only is openly, viciously anti-Semitic, openly calls in their charter for the destruction of Israel. Why would you bring up Israel in a charter about black lives in the United States? How would that be relevant? They bring it up that Israel shouldn't exist, that they want to destroy Israel in the charter of Black Lives Matter. George Soros funds them. George Soros despite being one of the world's greatest enemies of Israel and the Jewish people, funding dozens of organizations in Israel that undermine Israel. The worst organizations undermining everything Israel does. Supporting every evil cause in Israel to hurt Israel from within. George Soros is behind a lot of this. If you criticize him, that's anti-Semitism. Suddenly he's worried about anti-Semitism. When he supports Arab Muslim Nazi demonstrations where they burn Israeli flags, burn American flags, and chant death to the Jews, that's not anti-Semitism. That he funds. But if you say anything about him, that's anti-Semitism. Look how Orwellian, look how upside down, how twisted this world is, that he can get away with this, and that he gets a good person, a righteous Gentile like Glenn Beck, gets fired for trying to defend Israel and the Jewish people. By the way, Glenn Beck, on the show where he was exposing Soros, was exposing what he was doing to the Jewish people, was trying to protect Israel and the Jewish people. Glenn Beck is a righteous Gentile. And he gets fired because Fox News was panicking right away. Oh, we're going to be accused of anti-Semitism. Oh, blah, 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 blah. And look at how twisted the world is. The Gentile anti-Semites say that Soros does what he does in order to help Israel and the Jewish people. That Soros and the New York Nazi Times and all these other self-hating Jews who hate their own people with a passion, who are the worst enemies of Israel, the worst fifth columnists, the worst traitors to Israel and the Jewish people. The Gentile anti-Semites claim that they're doing everything in order to help Israel. They work, the Mossad is the one that gets them to do it. They work with the Mossad. Mossad is the Israeli CIA. That the Mossad is working, Mossad, by the way, means institution in Hebrew. That they're working with the Mossad. I mean, look how twisted and upside down the world is. Everything is the opposite. Prophet Isaiah warned us, woe unto those who call good evil and evil good, light darkness and darkness light. The prophets in the Bible warned us about this. And this generation, we see this happening squared. Now, George Soros, what did George Soros do when he was 14 years old? When George Soros was 14 years old, he worked for the Hungarian Judenrat. The Judenrat was the Jewish council that collaborated with the Nazis in Hungary. Now, there were people on the Judenrat who did it to save their own necks. To save their own necks, they worked against their fellow Jews and cooperated with the Germans. There were others who were just like Rudolf Kastner, who was the head of the Judenrat in Hungary. He worked enthusiastically to help the Germans and gave them all types of ideas on how to convince Hungarian Jews to willingly go to the death camps and to cooperate. Rudolf Kastner, the head of the Judenrat, for instance, in Hungary, what he did is he told the Germans, tell the Jews in the concentration camps in Auschwitz, in Treblinka, in Bergen-Belsen, tell the Jews there to write letters to the Jews in Hungary and tell them everything is fine here. We're in the work. We're working. They make us work. These are work camps. They make us work, but everything is fine here. Cooperate with the Germans and everything will be okay. He had the Jews in the concentration camps write those letters. He gave that idea to Eichmann and to the Nazis. And so they convinced huge numbers of Hungarian Jews to willingly get on board on the trains to go to Auschwitz and to go to the concentration camps to their deaths. That's Rudolf Kastner. May his name and memory be obliterated. May the name of the wicked rot. That vicious, evil Jewish Nazi. His granddaughter, by the way, is a longtime member of the Knesset. She's in the Israeli parliament. She's allowed to be in Israel. I'm banned from going to Israel, but his granddaughter, after what he did, all the Jewish blood he has on his hands, his granddaughter is allowed to be in the Jewish parliament, of course, as an extreme leftist, of course. She's an extreme left-winger. Now, George Soros was 14 years old when this was happening with Rudolf Kastner and the Judenrat during the Holocaust. And he agreed to work with the Judenrat. What did they do? The Germans had a plan where what they would do is they would have Jewish kids like George Soros, 14-year-old George Soros, knock on the doors of every home in neighborhoods where they knew that there were a reasonable number of Jews, where they knew that there was some Jewish population in Hungary. They'd go from door to door and they'd have Jewish kids knock on the door and say, "I'm Jewish, please hide me from the Germans. I'm running away from the Germans, please hide me." And if the family said, and Hungarians were very anti-Semitic, and so if the family said, "Well, you're crazy. I'm not going to help any Jews. Get out of here. I'm not helping any Jews." If the family said that, then they knew that the family wasn't Jewish. So they went to the next house. But if they knocked on the door and someone in the family said, "Oh, of course, come on in. I'll hide you. Of course, I'll protect you." If the family did that, he would right away signal to the German SS soldiers that were waiting outside. He would signal to them, and they would come and take that Jewish family to the concentration camp. They knew that they were Jewish. He went from door to door to do this, to find out where all the Jews are and to help the Germans locate all of the Jews so they could be sent to the death camps where they could be burned and gassed and tortured to death. Because the Germans knew that the Jews are a kind and compassionate people and that they wouldn't, that Jews are not going to leave a kid all alone if it's really a Jewish kid who's trying to escape the Nazis. They knew that the Jews would take chances to try to save him. They knew that the Jews would do that, so they knew that this is how you trap the Jews. And not Kastner, but George Soros, who was 14 years old at the time, willingly went along with this and was part of this program. And by the way, don't tell me, "Oh, he was only 14 years old." When you're 14 years old, you have free will. I was 14 years old when I first joined the Jewish Defense League to fight to save Soviet Jews. I started getting arrested and fighting for Soviet Jews at the age of 14. When you're 14, you do know what you're doing already. But if you're still going to make excuses for him, you should know that many, many years later, in an interview on 60 Minutes, they asked George Soros about this. And because it was a Gentile reporter, I think his name is Kraft. Is that the name of the reporter? You know the reporter on CBS called Kraft? Anyway, whatever. Anyway, he's with CBS. I think his name is Kraft.
But any program Soros was on, they treated him like royalty.
Right. But anyway, but this guy pressed him on the issue of what he did, because this guy couldn't believe, how could you do that to your fellow Jews? How can you do something so cruel? You knew that you're getting them to, they're going to be sent to concentration camps to be exterminated. How can you do something like this to your fellow Jews? So he pressed him on that. He said, "Did you feel guilty?" He said, "No, not at all. Not at all. No, not at all." He didn't feel any problem at all with it. He had like a cold Nazi, he answered the question. No, not at all. That's George Soros. Someone who works to destroy Israel. Someone who works to destroy the Jewish people. Someone who funds every anti-Israel cause under the sun and does irreparable damage to the Jewish people. And on top of that, even though he himself is a vicious anti-Semite, he causes massive anti-Semitism because he also funds every left-wing commie socialist cause under the sun. And so he enrages people in United States, Europe. They see this Jew funding all of this. So, of course, that causes anti-Semitism because they're people who are too dumb to distinguish between him and between Israel and the good Jews in Israel who wouldn't do that. And not only that, and again, as I mentioned, they actually blame Israel when a self-hating anti-Semitic Jew like Soros, they claim that Soros is part of a Zionist conspiracy. So you couldn't meet a Jew more anti-Zionist than George Soros, more anti-Israel than George Soros. They claim Israel is the one who's behind this. They're the one getting Soros to come to our country and fund all of these left-wing organizations. And so he causes massive anti-Semitism and gives ammunition to all of the evil anti-Semites in every country as well. This is as bad as it can get. You can't imagine a situation worse than this. It reminds me of what happened during the Holocaust. in the United States, American Jews did nothing to save 6 million Jews during the Holocaust. Nothing. The same American Jews who were so active for black civil rights and for labor unions and for all types of other causes, but to save 6 million Jews during the worst crime in history that was committed against their own brothers and sisters, that they didn't do anything for. They did nothing for that, except for one group headed by Peter Bergson and Ben Hecht. Peter Bergson and Ben Hecht were right-wing Jabotinsky Jews, and they put together an emergency organization to try to save Jews during the Holocaust, and they did save about 500,000 Jews in the end. They did get cooperation from certain people, from Jews and Gentiles, who helped them out, and they did wind up saving some Jews during the Holocaust. But American Jews as a whole, aside from that one group, American Jews as a whole did nothing to save their brothers and sisters during the Holocaust. Nothing. Not only that, American Jewish organizations worked to undermine Peter Bergson and Ben Hecht. When they met with Roosevelt, Yimach Shmo v'Zichro, that filthy Nazi pig, when they met with Roosevelt in the White House, instead of telling Roosevelt, the Jewish leader should have told Roosevelt, listen, you got to bomb those rail lines leading to the death camps. You've got to destroy those death camps. You've got to stop the German murder machinery and stop this Holocaust. America had mastery over the skies of Germany, had defeated the German Air Force, could have done it easily, could have prevented the whole Holocaust. America could have prevented the Holocaust. Roosevelt deliberately refused to, and Churchill and the British deliberately refused to do anything to save the 6 million, and in fact did everything they could to enable the Germans to continue murdering the Jews. And American Jewish organizations and British Jewish organizations did nothing to save the Jews during the Holocaust. And in fact, when they met with Roosevelt, you know the first thing that Stephen Wise of the American Jewish Congress said? He's also was the head of the reform movement, the deform movement in America. You know the first thing that he said to Roosevelt? You should revoke the visa that was given to Peter Bergson. Peter Bergson's in this country. He's not an American citizen. Why does he have a visa? You should revoke his visa. Instead of saying, save the 6 million Jews, he wanted to undermine the Jewish activist that was doing something to save the 6 million. These are the Judenrat of America. These are the Rudolf Kastners and the George Soros Judenrat in America. And that's AIPAC and the Anti-Defamation League and the American Jewish Congress and the American Jewish Committee and UJA, which is the United Jihad Appeal. All of these evil organizations, Hadassah, they did nothing to save 6 million Jews. And the Zionist Organization of America, the ZOA, nothing to save 6 million Jews. Not one thing. Later, in the 1950s, though, they did try to save their fellow Jews. 2 Jews by the name of Julius and Ethel Rosenberg. Those Jews they did try to save. They held demonstrations. There were mass demonstrations to save the Rosenbergs. You know who the Rosenbergs were? The Rosenbergs were 2 Jews who were members of the Communist Party USA, when the Communist Party was a complete puppet of Stalinist Russia. And the Rosenbergs, who worked for the U.S. government, passed nuclear and atomic secrets to the Soviet Union, from the United States to the Soviet Union, to enable the Soviets to develop nuclear bombs. They passed secrets to Stalinist Russia. They were loyal to Stalin. Stalin, who murdered thousands of Jewish men, women, and children. Stalin, who signed a pact with Hitler that divided up Poland and that led to the beginning of the Holocaust. Stalin, who himself, when he died of a heart attack, thank God, in the 1950s, just before he died, he was planning to carry out a Holocaust against the Jews in the Soviet Union. Stalin, who sent tens of thousands of Jews, aside from the Jews he murdered, he sent tens of thousands of other Jews to Siberian work camps, concentration camps in Siberia.
Those were called gulags.
The Gulag system. And these Jews, the Rosenbergs, were willing to give their lives for Stalin. What vile slime! There are no words to describe such vile individuals. And for them, There were mass demonstrations, free the Rosenbergs. Not one demonstration was held for 6 million Jews during the Holocaust. Not one demonstration was held for the 2 million children, Jewish children and babies that were murdered during the Holocaust. But for the Rosenbergs, who supported Stalin and wanted and passed nuclear secrets to Stalin, I mean, they both got the electric chair, thank God. But the electric chair is much too good for them. Much too good for them. And mass demonstrations to help them. And by the way, there were Jews during the Holocaust who said, if we demonstrate for the Jews in the Holocaust, if we demonstrate for the Jews who are being murdered in Europe, it's going to cause anti-Semitism. But they weren't worried about causing anti-Semitism when they demonstrated for the Rosenbergs. That really caused anti-Semitism. Demonstrating for two admitted communists who were spying for the Soviet Union and handing over America's most important nuclear secrets to the Soviet Union, that's not going to cause anti-Semitism. No.
You know, in the trial, the Rosenbergs denied it. And they had plenty of supporters who denied it and claimed they were innocent. But it was about 25 years ago, it came out that they actually, when the Soviet Union collapsed, the Soviet Union, Russia, admitted the Rosenbergs gave them the atomic secrets.
They didn't deny they were members of the Communist Party, by the way.
No.
That they didn't deny. Okay? Come on. Give me a break. They had her own brother testified against them at the trial. Her brother testified against them at the trial to save his neck because he didn't want to get electrocuted. So he testified against them at the trial. I mean, come on. I mean, the evidence against them was so overwhelming. But anyway, in any event, this is the upside down world we live in. With Jews, after 2,000 years of exile. For thousands of years, the Jews were persecuted, murdered, raped, tortured, everywhere they went. All types, the worst things. Jews could never win, no matter what happened. If Jews were rich and successful, people were jealous of them. If Jews were poor and persecuted and lived in poverty, and in Poland and Russia and other places where they were very poor because they didn't allow them to succeed, then they were looked down upon with contempt because of their poverty. So if they were poor, they were hated. If they were rich, they were hated. If they were in different countries in Europe and elsewhere, they'd say, "Go to Israel. What do you stay here? Go to Israel. You come originally from. Go back to where you came from." And then when they go to Israel, the world says to them, "You don't belong in Israel. Go back to Europe." The Jews can never win. They can never win. Where do you have a people that's accused of killing God, that's accused of deicide? I mean, there are Christians who accuse the Jews of killing God. So the Jews can never win, okay? And so you can't, you don't come out normal in a situation like this. After thousands of years of this, they're not normal. They're crazy people. They become crazy. And this is, by the way, one of the proofs of God fulfilling the prophecies in the Bible. Jews and righteous Gentiles should pay attention to this, because a people that's nuts like this survives against all these odds and wins when they're outnumbered 100-1 in the Middle East, wins wars outnumbered 100-1 in 6-day wars. I mean, what a miracle. What an incredible miracle. The Jews are the last people in the world that I would place a bet on to survive. They're the last people. They don't even want to survive. They're the last people in the world I would bet on. The Arab Muslims, on the other hand, those are the people I would bet on. Or I would have bet in ancient times. You have the ancient Romans, the ancient Greeks, the Babylonians. They're all gone. There's no trace of any of their empires today. There's no similarity between ancient Greece and modern Greece, between ancient Rome and modern Italy, between ancient Persia and modern Iran, between ancient Egypt and modern Egypt. Those civilizations are gone, all completely gone. But I would have bet on them a lot, way before I would have bet on the Jews. They had huge armies and mass empires, and they wanted to survive, and they were normal and sane. They were cruel, but they were normal and sane. And the Jews survived thousands of years, and everybody else disappeared. Everybody else is gone. All these other ancient civilizations are gone. And the Jews, hated by everybody, thrown out of their country 2,000 years ago, scattered to the four winds, and 2,000 years later they come back to their homeland and win, outnumbered 100-1, when the whole world's against them? And you don't see the hand of God in this? When it was predicted this would happen thousands of years ago in the Bible, and you don't see the hand of God? What are you, blind? And instead of supporting the good Jews like the Hilltop youth in Israel, or Jewish heroes in Israel, no. Instead, if George Soros, somebody criticized George Soros, that monster, that Jew-hating monster, oh, anti-Semitism. That's anti-Semitism.
You remember George Soros also tried to bankrupt England. It's not just Jews. He's just an evil man from top to bottom.
In the end, you have people who go and accuse the Jews of everything. I mean, you had Joe Rogan recently, who has the biggest podcast in the world. He said Israel commits genocide. He had someone on his show basically saying the Jews are running the world and accusing the Jews of killing JFK, of assassinating JFK. The Mossad assassinated JFK. And the Jews are behind. I mean, every conspiracy under the sun. The UFOs, the Jews are with the UFO. I thought the UFO thing was over. You know what happened with the UFOs, right? You know why that's over. Because of cell phones. Every minute we used to have people saying, oh, I saw right near my cornfield in Nebraska, I saw a giant saucer came by with green UFOs coming out of there. And they said, Jimmy Bob, you get in this here saucer right now, or you ain't never gonna see your woman again. You know, this would happen every 3 minutes. We were getting people, thousands and thousands of reports of this happening, of people being abducted by flying saucers. And all of a sudden, with the cell phones, that stopped. You know why? Because with the cell phones, everybody knows you have a cell phone. You could. Why don't you take a picture of it? How come you never took a picture with your cell phone? So that's why the UFO stuff died down. Not on Joe Rogan's show, though. On his show and on in other places, and it's not only that the UFOs are Jews, are Zionists. The Mossad are also UFOs. I mean, and he had someone on his show recently, this guy Campbell, who not only is a Holocaust denier, but is someone who works day and night to undermine. Not only undermine, I mean, day and night he works to promote and propagate the worst Jew-hating conspiracy theories, the worst thing you can imagine. And then you see all the responses to him. Oh yeah, it's about time. Oh, I was so happy to see finally this is coming out into the open about what the Jews are doing. Finally, it's coming out into the open. This is not the left. Okay? And by the way, to show you how immoral and evil these people are. Joe Rogan, by the way, now the right, the so-called right, a lot of the Trumpsters like him. Donald Trump appeared on his show. It's not the left. Donald Trump appeared on his show. And you want to know what type of right-winger Joe Rogan is? Oh, he's a real right-winger. In 2016, he supported Bernie Sanders for president. And he said, oh, I really like him. This is the best candidate. Oh, this guy I really like. This is the first time I'm really excited. I really like him, Bernie Sanders. He supported Bernie Sanders for president in 2016. He's also
a socialist who owns 4 houses.
Right. Joe Rogan's also an atheist. Joe Rogan has done shows explaining how he supports homosexual marriages. He supports homosexual marriages and the homosexual agenda, very right-wing. He supports legalizing all drugs. He says, for recreational purposes. That's what he said, legalizing drugs for recreation. Well, let's have a nice party of recreational heroin and recreational cocaine and fentanyl. That sounds like a good idea. We'll have a lot of fun at the party. He wants to legalize that'll be very good for the country. He supports socialized medicine. One of the reasons he backed Sanders is because he likes Obamacare, but he thinks it should go much further. He wants socialized medicine. He wants the government to control all medicine. That's a great idea. And he even had people on his site saying, well, listen, we know the government they can handle our health care needs. Just look at how they run the post office. This is what they were saying on the site. I mean, imagine if God forbid you need serious surgery and you're going to have the government, you have to rely on the government to handle it the way they handle the post office. You're going to have them handling your surgery. That's a great idea. And this is the so-called right winger now. He's the so-called right winger. So you see that this is a world upside down with no logic and no common sense. No logic, no common sense anymore. Everything is going out the window. And that's why the Jews are supposed to be a light unto the nations and a holy nation, nation of priests who are supposed to wake people up in the end days and say, hey, look at what's happening in the Holy Land. Look at what God is doing here. Look at the challenges you face in all of your countries. Look what you can do to make this a better world. That's what the Jews are supposed to be doing. That's the role the Jews are supposed to be playing at this time. Only one group of Jews is doing that, and that's the Hilltop youth. That's why we should be supporting them. On this program, everything we have goes to the Hilltop youth. I work day and night just to help the Hilltop youth. Everything we have goes for them. And it couldn't be, it's the best cause, the most noble cause you could have. Because if they win, then the world will be in a much better place, because they will wake up the Jews of Israel. If the Jews of Israel wake up, that will wake up righteous Gentiles in every country. The Hilltop youth are the Jews in Judea and Samaria who are preventing the Arabs from having Arab territorial continuity in Judea and Samaria, which would lead to the creation of a Palestinian terrorist state, which would be suicide for Israel. Israel would be 10 miles wide. Israel would be I'm used to saying 10 kilometers wide in Hebrew because it's kilometers, but it's actually 6 to 9 miles in mileage. Israel will be 6 to 9 miles wide. Can you imagine Israel being in borders 6 to 9 miles wide when she's surrounded by 500 million Arab Muslims and by 1.5 billion Muslims of other Muslims, including Pakistanis, Iranians, Turks? There are 1.5 billion Muslims in the world, 57 Muslim countries. Can you imagine little Israel trying to survive in the face of that, being surrounded by that, if she were in boundaries that are 6 to 9 miles wide? It's suicide. It's complete suicide. But that's what would happen if the Hilltop youth weren't there. That's why we support them. What noble, heroic young Jews. And you can support them too. You can do good in the world. You can fight against this madness. You can give George Soros a gift that he'll choke on. You can fight it. By the way, George Soros also works against the Hilltop youth. That's another thing that he works on. You can fight for the good Jews and for the truth and for what Jews and righteous Gentiles are supposed to be doing in this generation. And the way to do it is to help. And why the Hilltop youth? Because the Hilltop youth are not talk. They don't do just podcasts and talk. They are putting their lives on the line. They're actually moving. They and their families move to the frontier to block the Arabs from taking over. That would be like Gentiles, patriots in the United States moving to the Mexican border to protect the United States from illegal immigration. That would be the similar situation. The Hilltop youth in Israel are doing what has to be done, and they are the heroes of our generation. And if you help them, you're helping the cause that is more worthy than any other cause. Here's how you help the heroic Hilltop youth. You can go to our Hebrew main page, hayamin.org, and there's a donate button in English on top. You click on the donate button, and there are two things you can do once you click on the donate button. You can either leave recurring monthly donations. In other words, you click on one of the monthly amounts for recurring donations, and then every month, as long as you want to, you can make donations on your credit. You'll make donations on your credit card for whatever amount you choose, and you'll be part of the recurring monthly donation supporters that we have, which is very, very important. Or you can make a one-time donation, which is also very important. You just click on that donate button. It's very easy to do, and you can help the heroic Hilltop youth. Also, you should leave JTF in your will. If you leave JTF, the Jewish Task Force, in your will, that money will go to the Hilltop Youth. You can't leave it to a better cause than that. All of that is what I told you about, that the donate button and hayamin.org, that's online if you want to donate online. If you want to donate through the regular mail, nope, just as good. You can send checks and money orders made out to JTF, and you send it to the post office box, JTF PO Box 650327, Fresh Meadows, New York 11365. We're in a war here to save the world, to save Israel, and then to wake the world up. That's the battle we're facing here. And the Hilltop Youth, they're the ones who are fighting this battle heroically. The difference between them, it says in the Talmud that when the Jews are only in extremes. When they're great, they rise to the heavens. And when they're low, they're lower than the mud. So we've got the Jews rise to the heavens with their greatness like the Hilltop Youth, or you have the Jews that are lower than mud, like George Soros, or AIPAC, or Jewish establishment organizations, or Bernie Sanders, or Schmuck Schumer, etc., etc. Be on the side of the good people and do something about it. Actually do something about it. Actually do something to make a difference. That, I can tell you won't regret. You won't regret. If you do good in this world, you won't regret it. David?
Well, talking about the world being upside down, in Washington State, a 15-year-old girl refuses to play varsity basketball due to an 18-year-old transgender in there. And even though they're transgender, they still have much of the male power they were born with. And they fractured the skulls of some of the women, especially in volleyball. And there's nothing wrong with the 18-year-old male playing with 15-year-old girls. But the 15-year-old girl is charged with bullying, harassment, and misgendering.
Oh, misgendering, that's a crime now?
Yeah, in Washington
What does
State.
misgendering mean? She called him a man instead when he's a
Yeah,
woman? Did you see in Congress that happened also? Did you see that?
I heard that, yeah.
Yeah, that someone a Republican congressman, I thought it was great. Republican congressman was referring to one of these creatures and said and called him a man. And the Democrats went crazy. Yeah. By the way, we're talking about men here who have male genitalia. Let's put it that way. I'm trying to be as nice as polite as I can. Male genitalia, have a male body, were born male, and are walking around claiming they're women. You decide who you think is right and who you think is wrong. You decide. You decide if this is normal. By the way, do you think God approves of this? I don't know. Read the Bible and see what you think God. Let's read the Bible and tell me if you think God would approve of this. I'm sorry. Go ahead, David.
Just because you want mental delusions and want the world to think your male body is a woman because you put a dress on and put makeup on, I don't have to go along with your mental problems.
Why would somebody... I'm sorry. Go ahead. Forget it. Just forget it. It's just...
And then also in America, you probably don't know this because you lived in New York. There's nursing homes and assisted living. But around the country, there are nursing houses where it's just a normal house in the middle of a neighborhood, a residential neighborhood, and they hold, depending on the size of the house, 5 to 10 residents, and maybe 1 or 2 nurses stay there. And I call them nursing houses to differentiate them from nursing homes. I have one next door, right next door. And Saturday morning, someone died there because there were police cars and fire trucks out front. When you see the police cars, you know somebody died because they're there to sign the death certificate. Well, anyway, somewhere in the country, in a nursing house, an old woman with a walker was watching TV with a nurse The nurse's name was maybe Letitia or Lanisha, or do the disher. And the old woman changed the channel. The nurse got up and clobbered the old woman. Her walker went flying, and she wasn't hurt too bad. It was a slap, but it was a bad slap that knocked her over on her side. And that's where the video cut off, just as someone else was coming in the room to see what was going on. And I'm sure that nurse got into trouble, but that's what's going on when no one's around. And some of these nurses can, can get away with this. And here's another problem. In Virginia High School, they held a track relay meet. This was a relay race. So you have to carry a baton and you pass it off to the next runner on your team. Well, in this case, and I'll leave it to your imagination who they are, they're very fast runners. The woman with the baton on the inside lane bopped the woman on the second from the inside lane who was passing her by. To make sure she didn't pass by, she took the baton and gave her a good shot across the head. That runner had a concussion, and they believe at the time I watched it, skull fracture. So and of course they had a forfeit. That school team, the whole team had a forfeit. And the girl that was charged with this, and I don't know what happened because it's all so far it's just charges. She was crying that's the way she runs. She never meant to hit the woman, and she wanted to apologize, but the woman that had the concussion and possible fracture won't answer her calls or won't answer any emails. But this is competition in America today. And when Donald Trump gave that speech, I guess it was the State of the Union. I didn't watch it because it's boring. You catch the highlights on YouTube, the real important things of what went on. Well, there was a black boy who was battling cancer for 6 years. And he's probably, he looked like he was 12, 13, maybe 14 at the most. And he was made an honorary police officer. That's something he wanted to be his entire life. And Donald Trump had the head of the Secret Service give him a badge. So he's honorary Secret Service. And all the Republicans stood up. There were a lot of non-dry eyes. The Democrats sat there stone dead. They not only didn't stand up, they didn't applaud. This is what Democrats think of blacks who step out of line. They like the blacks who bop you on the head with the racing baton. But when you get one who wants to be a police officer, who has aspirations to be something good when he grows up, they treat you like you don't exist. And the blacks continue to vote for Democrats. I don't understand why. They hate you. They're using you. In the words of Lenin, you're just useful idiots.
There's no worse racist than a white liberal.
No.
The worst, the biggest hypocrites, the biggest racists are the white liberals.
Over in Europe, of course, we have the Ukraine war going on, and I hope Trump doesn't weaken and start sending billions to Ukraine again. We voted him in to stop that. Ukraine, I don't know what they were like before the war, but in World War II, much of Ukraine was pro-Nazi. When the German Wehrmacht marched in, they greeted them with flowers. They marched down the streets giving the Heil Hitler sign. They shared ice cream with the Germans. They thought the Germans were there to rescue them from Stalin. Well, the Germans at first thought they were going to be heroes, but Hitler said, no, these are Slavs, they're inferior, and you have to treat them like an inferior race. And that's the one major difference. That's probably the biggest difference between communists and Nazis, because the Nazis are National Socialists. A lot of their policies are the same, but everything in communism is based on class, and everything in Nazism is based on race. And that's probably the biggest difference. There's many other differences, but the one that's major is the racial lens that the Nazis see everything through versus the the class lens that the communists see everything through.
That's what the communists claim. The communists claim that they don't have those racial.
Yeah, but they're
But
so
it's
close
that's
to the
all. That's a
Nazis.
lie. That, of course, is a lie too. The Russians, of course, were very racist against non-Russian minorities in Russia. By the way, the non in the Soviet Union, the non-Russian minorities were like 50% of the population, and the Russians were very racist against them, and certainly very racist against the Jews. So that's all. And you asked what Ukraine was like before the Holocaust. The Cossacks murdered hundreds of thousands of Jews. Hundreds of thousands of Jews before the Holocaust in the 16th, 17th, 15th century. Huge massacres of Jews. The Cossacks, notorious. And you know, and by the way, as far as communism is concerned, they claim that the only difference, the only interest is in class because everybody has to be equal. There's only one problem. Under communism, some people are more equal than others.
You were going to say that because that's true. Look at Stalin. He had 15 palaces. He claimed he didn't own them because everybody's equal, but they were his to use while he was alive. Well, the Ukrainians, as the Germans started seeing the war not going too well for them and the Russians were coming on, and they tried to recruit as many as they could to help fight the Russians, the Ukrainians, a lot of them became Ukrainian divisions to fight against the Bolsheviks. And worse, a lot of Ukrainians became the lowest level guards at the death camps. The camps were run by SS officers, but the lowest level guards and the SS officers had no respect for them. But they were there, and they were there to guard the Jews and punish the Jews. And
They were there to massacre the Jews.
yeah,
Ivan the
so
Terrible, Ivan
the
the
SS,
Terrible, and Demoniac and Ivan the Terrible, the worst Nazi war criminals of the Holocaust were Ukrainian.
yeah, because the SS guards didn't want to soil their hands by handling the Zyklon B gas. So they had Ukrainians do. They had the Ukrainians do all the lousy jobs. When the Jews escaped from Sobibor, they knew they had to kill the SS officers. They knew the Ukrainians wouldn't be able to function without SS officer heading them. And they did kill the Nazi officers. And the Ukrainians shot a few Jews running, but about 300 escaped. And because of that, Hitler was so embarrassed, he burnt the camp down. Well, anyway, that's Ukraine. And they never got over that pro-Nazi feeling. If you look at Ukraine today, they have their own flags with a swastika in it, and they show the German flag. And when we first started doing these podcasts, I had pictures. I brought pictures of the German flag and the Ukrainian flag. So in countries like Romania and Serbia now, in their parliaments, they're starting to switch sides, a lot more becoming pro-Russian and anti-Ukrainian. And what's going on in these parliaments are not, it's what our Congress probably wishes they could do. But, and again, maybe not because they're too cowardly. But fist fights are breaking out. They're throwing smoke bombs, stink bombs. Guys are shooting off Roman candles at the opposition. You could burn an eye out with that. And clouds of this red smoke going up. And that's going on in Serbia, which I don't like to see. And it's also going on in Romania.
But
Meanwhile,
I'm sorry. Go ahead. No, I was just going to say. I was just going to say. By the way, I knew it would be temporary. I knew that he's going to give in eventually. And of course, I'm disappointed. He appears to be giving in on Ukraine now, Trump. But originally, he cut off all foreign aid to every country to dozens of countries except for Egypt and Israel, which that I disagree. I think he should have cut off also to Egypt and Israel, but he should cut off to everybody. There should be no foreign aid, no foreign aid, not one penny. And by the way, that's the best thing you can do for Israel. The best thing you can do for Israel is cut off foreign aid. Israel is perfectly capable and will be much stronger and much better positioned without the so-called foreign aid.
And Arab countries without foreign aid, unless they have oil, will wither on the vine.
That would be terrible.
And before Donald Trump spoke, one of the one of the congressmen made a jerk of himself. His name is Al Green. And here he is. I have a picture of him. I think that's his father in back of him.
Oh, yeah. His twin brother. You didn't say what he did, though.
I just heard he made a jerk of himself. I don't know.
No, he got up and started screaming while Trump was speaking. He got up and started heckling Trump in the middle of the speech, started screaming while Trump is, speaking. Very democratic, by the way. That's true. That you stop someone, you shut somebody up, they're not allowed to speak. That's very democratic. That's what the left does.
They don't want.
In the name of democracy, they shut people up.
Yeah, they don't want to hear the opposite side. And we talked about how barbaric the Nazis were and the Ukrainians. As far as the Nazis go, the Arabs are worse. Look at this young girl burned alive on October 7th. And if I mentioned earlier on, if they're this barbaric to each other, that's not an Arab, that's an Israeli. But he told about the Muslims killing each other, and if they're this barbaric to each other, just imagine what they want to do to you. Well, an 18-year-old girl, Ryan al-Najjar, was tied up with tape and then drowned by her father and brothers in the Netherlands for being too westernized. When arrested, they defended themselves by stating that honor killings are normal in their culture. They did this to their own daughter.
The same thing has happened in the United States. There are honor killings in the United States.
Yeah.
It's been happening. It's been happening, and in Israel, it happens all the time. In every Arab village, all the time, all the time.
And look what's going on in Syria. They kicked Assad out, and they killed at least 2,000 Christians. They're pulling the clothing off of Christian women, raping them, and then killing them. They're just outright killing Christian men. And I didn't verify it, but on my wife's computer, just before we started the show, I saw that number could be as high as 17,000 now. The true number will come out eventually. But look at how barbaric these people are. And just imagine what they want to do to you. You're probably either Christian or an atheist, or you just don't care, you have nothing. Or you might be Jewish in America and the other Western countries. Eventually, they're going to take over. Here's a Muslim cleric who says when Muslims become the majority, this is America, he's talking about America, in the next 40 years, you will have two options: convert or pay the jizya. That's a non-Islamic tax. The zakat is the tax Muslims pay. The jizya is the much higher tax that non-Muslims pay. But because Allah is merciful, He will allow you to pay the tax.
They're lying. By the way, they're lying. They're lying.
Yeah, wait, let me finish.
Yeah.
His next line is, if you do not, you will die.
Yeah. That's what they really intend to do. There's not going to be any tax or anything else. By the way, speaking about Syria, because you mentioned Syria and the Christians being slaughtered in Syria, and the the Alawites are also being slaughtered there. That's a Muslim sect, but the other Muslims are slaughtering the Alawites. The Alawites, when they were in power with Assad was Alawite. When they were in power, they would slaughter they slaughtered the other Muslims. Back and forth, everybody slaughtering everybody. And what's interesting is the minute this new leader took over, his name is Giuliani, not Giuliani. His name is Giuliani. Okay, that's his. It's not his real. I don't even remember what his real Arabic name is, but he calls himself Giuliani, and he's the new leader of Syria. He's a member of Al Qaeda. He's a member of Al Qaeda. He was. Now, he wasn't always a member of Al Qaeda. At one time, he was a member of the Islamic State of ISIS. Then he went to Al Qaeda. So he's been to Al Qaeda or either Al Qaeda or ISIS. He is still a member of Al Qaeda. He's still a member of Al Qaeda. The same organization that slaughtered 3,000 Americans on 9/11. This is the new leader of Syria. United States, Israel, all the nations of the world, the Europeans, all the nations of the world are running to them and saying, "Oh, we have to have diplomatic relations. We have to have discussions with you. This is listen, you're the new leader. Maybe we should give you foreign aid. Maybe we should help you." You know, the world never. They just don't learn. They just don't learn.
Because the first thing out of their mouths is, well, it's not all Muslims that are like that. Well, yes, it is. They believe in their religion, unlike most people in the other religions, and they follow it to the letter.
As you know, I would sum it up in one sentence: the only good Muslim is forget about it. Let's move on.
All you have to do is read a pre-1990 translation of the Quran, which is an insane rant. So you're better off reading the Hadith. It's just as violent, just as deadly, just as much of a death cult, but it's more like it's written so you can understand it and follow it. It's got some logic behind it, if you call that logic. Meanwhile, Muslim men in Britain are attacking British women for breaking Sharia law. Paterson, New Jersey, back in the United States, now known as the capital of Palestine, has a Muslim government as Islam marches on to take over our country. And is this the second city, the third city they've taken over? Hamtramck, Michigan was the first, where the call of the Hassan was way above normal allowable sound levels. And did you ever pass on the street? You see veterans, and you give them $1, and he gives you a poppy, an artificial poppy, and you wear it to show that you donated to a veteran. Well, the Muslims want that stopped because it offends them. And I have a little story to tell. A lot of people like my stories. They don't know how I know these things. Some of them are so obscure. I think Catholics are going to like this story. During the First World War, we're going back to 1915, Italy fought with the Allies. They were with England, France, and eventually the United States. Well, a corporal and a sergeant from the Italian army got lost behind German lines, actually Austrian lines. And they couldn't find their way back. So what they did was, and the corporal spoke fluent German. The sergeant didn't, just Italian. And so they found German uniforms. They put on German uniforms or Austrian uniforms, and they saw some Austrian soldiers, and they told them that we have to collect intelligence on the Allied lines. Where are those Allied lines? So the Austrian guy tells them in Austrian, German, that way to the Allied lines. It's over there. And then the Austrian asks, that man with you, he's a sergeant. Why are you doing all the talking? And the corporal says, well, he's just a dumb sergeant. Sergeants don't know anything. Well, anyway, they worked their way back to their own lines, but that's not the end of the story. Decades later, the guy that was accused of being just a dumb sergeant, it was Pope John the 23rd. And my last picture is, they're finding all kinds of fraud, people that are 150 to 200 years old collecting Social Security. Well, I have a picture of 4 of them.
Absolutely.
I don't know what this thing is. I know she's from Connecticut. This is
That's
Sanders.
Delora. Her name is Delora, I think. Yeah.
I think you're right.
I think so.
Pelosi.
Yeah. Right. Bernie Sanders, and then I forgot the other one from California, from Los Angeles.
Waters.
Oh, right. Yep.
Look at the blue hair on this thing from Connecticut. How could anybody vote to put that in our government? It just shows how upside down the world is. And this country's leading the way, trying to drag everybody else into the upside down world where our world is in with them, with us. At least in Poland, they said they're not going that way. They said England doesn't exist anymore. It's a Muslim country. And they said, we're not going to take any immigrants in because we don't want our country to end up like England. And they mentioned England specifically. Then they said, in the rest of the West, they're all on their way down because they bring in immigrants who don't belong there, who have nothing in common with them. A country can't survive like that. So Poland, the speaker, he was probably a member of parliament. I don't know if he was the head of the country. He said, hopefully we will keep this and just watch the rest of the West go down. And that's it.
In your heart, you know we're right, and in your guts, you know they're nuts. For J.T.F. until next week, this is Chaim Ben Pesach. Shalom.